Clara Whitmore pressed her fingers against the burn on her shoulder and did not scream a second time. She had already given them that. She would not give them anything more. The ivory gown her mother had sewn was ruined, oil-soaked, torn at the sleeve, stained beyond saving. Her stepsisters had walked out laughing. The gathering downstairs was already in full motion. Every eligible woman in Virginia was dressed, perfumed, and ready to be chosen. And Clara was on the floor. If you've ever been dismissed by the people who were supposed to love you, stay with me. Subscribe to this channel. Follow this story all the way to the end. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1816 pressed down on Virginia like a hand that refused to lift. The heat had started in late May, and never relented thick still air that turned every doorway to a wall, and made the long grass along the Ashford property line curl at the edges, as if the land itself was trying to fold inward. By mid-July, the soil along the creek road had cracked into pale ribbons, and the cicadas had been screaming since dawn. None of that mattered to the women arriving at Ashford House that evening. What mattered was the invitation. What mattered was the gathering that Nathaniel Ashford's mother had quietly, carefully organized over the course of 3 months, a selection, as the older women called it, behind their fans, though no one was polite enough to say the word plainly in front of the young ladies involved. What mattered was that Nathaniel Ashford, 34 years old, sole heir to the Ashford banking interests and 3,000 acres of Virginia farmland, respected by every judge and merchant between Richmond and the Tennessee border, was ready to choose a wife, and every family with a daughter of suitable age had made certain their girl was in that house before sunset. Clara Whitmore had arrived in the back of the family wagon, seated beside 2 trunks that belonged to her stepsisters. She had not been invited. She had come because Rebecca had told her father that someone needed to manage the trunks, press the gowns, and ensure that the hairpins were counted, and the perfume bottles did not spill during the road. Her father had nodded. Her father almost always nodded when Rebecca spoke. It had been that way since the second marriage, since Clara's mother had been 3 years in the ground, since the house had slowly, quietly stopped being a place Clara recognized. She was 22 years old. She had been managing her father's household accounts since she was 14. She knew the exact weight of unpaid debts and the exact number of acres her late mother had left her in a will that her father had never once mentioned aloud. She also knew, without being told, that she was not expected to be seen at the Ashford gathering. She was expected to be useful and then invisible. She had accepted that. She had packed a plain blue day dress alongside her stepsister's evening gowns, folded it flat at the bottom of her own small bag, and told herself that the night would pass, the way most nights passed, with her watching from a doorway while other people occupied the center of the room. But Rebecca had decided that even that was too much. Clara had been upstairs in the small dressing room at the end of the guest hall, fastening the sleeve button on her ivory gown. She had not planned to wear it. The ivory dress had been her mother's, altered twice over the years as Clara grew, kept in a cedar box with dried lavender and a single note in her mother's handwriting that said simply, "For the day you are finally seen." Clara had not worn it to anything in years. But something about the evening, something about the particular quality of the golden light coming through the upstairs window, had made her take it out of the box and put it on. She was standing at the small mirror checking the sleeve when the door opened. She did not hear them come in. She heard the door, and then she turned, and Rebecca and Dorothea were already inside. Rebecca carrying a small brass cosmetic pot with a folded cloth around the handle. Dorothea wearing the particular smile she wore when she had already decided how something was going to end. "You look almost presentable," Dorothea said pleasantly. Clara kept her hands still. "I was just finishing." "Were you?" Rebecca set the brass pot on the edge of the dressing table and tilted her head to one side. "I only came to ask if you'd seen my blue ribbon. I thought I left it in here." "I haven't seen any ribbon." Rebecca picked up the pot again. Her voice stayed light. "You really shouldn't have worn that gown tonight, Clara. Mama's things are so sentimental. Don't you think it's time to let some things go?" Clara turned back toward the mirror. "I'd like to finish dressing if you don't mind." She did not see Rebecca move. She felt the heat before she understood what had happened. A sudden sharp burn across her right shoulder and the back of her hand, the wet weight of heated cosmetic oil soaking through the ivory fabric, the smell of scorched cloth rising instantly. She made a sound that she had not planned to make. Not quite a scream. Something worse, a short cut-off cry of pure shock and pain. The oil was not boiling. Rebecca had been careful about that. Careful enough to cause damage without leaving marks that would be immediately obvious. The gown absorbed most of it. But the burn across Clara's shoulder was real, and the stain spread across the ivory fabric in a dark spreading bloom that no amount of pressing or soaking would ever fully remove. Dorothea stepped back toward the door. Rebecca set the cloth and pot down on the dressing table as calmly as if she had just finished pouring tea. "No respectable man," Rebecca said quietly, "is going to look at you tonight, or any other night for that matter. You're here to carry bags. Try to remember that." They left. Clara stood at the mirror for a long moment. The burn on her shoulder throbbed. The smell of scorched fabric was sharp and close. She could hear the sound of the gathering downstairs music beginning somewhere, voices overlapping, the particular warmth of a house full of people who had all come for the same purpose. She looked at the ruined gown in the mirror. She thought about her mother's handwriting. "For the day you are finally seen." She peeled the ivory dress off, carefully folded it, and placed it back in the cedar box. She changed into the plain blue dress. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed for 4 minutes, she counted, and then she stood up, smoothed the skirt with both hands, and walked downstairs. She did not cry. She had decided a long time ago that crying in front of people who were hoping for it was a form of surrender she was not willing to make. Downstairs Ashford House was everything Clara had expected it to be, and nothing she'd had the capacity to fully prepare for. The main parlor had been opened into the dining room, and the doors to the back garden stood wide to let in whatever slight movement the summer air offered. Candles and oil lamps had turned the whole lower floor warm and gold. Women in high-waisted evening gowns moved in careful, deliberate patterns near the windows, near the refreshment tables, always positioned where they might most naturally be observed. Their mothers occupied the chairs along the walls with the focused patience of women who had managed social calculations for decades. The men were fewer and more clustered: merchants, landowners, legal men, several younger sons of good families. They formed their own groupings near the doorways and spoke about business and horse prices and the heat with the comfortable vagueness of men who were not yet required to perform. Nathaniel Ashford stood near the far window with Mr. Elias Warren, his estate steward, and one of his legal advisers, a thin, sharp-eyed man named Mr. Callum Holt, who was known for his work with inheritance and land title disputes. Nathaniel was not the tallest man in the room, but he was the one people adjusted their position around. There was something in the way he stood, not arrogance exactly, more like the particular stillness of a man who had stopped needing to prove things, that made the room arrange itself in relation to him without anyone planning it. He was listening to something Holt was saying about a boundary dispute in the western counties, and his expression was attentive but distant, as if one part of his mind was always somewhere slightly ahead of the conversation. He had heard the sound from upstairs. He had not identified it immediately. It was brief, and the noise of the gathering covered it almost at once. But it had been a woman's voice, and it had carried that specific quality of pain that is distinct from surprise, distinct from alarm, something with physical weight behind it. He had glanced toward the ceiling instinctively, and then glanced at Warren, and Warren had given him the small level look that meant I noticed it too. Neither of them had said anything. The gathering had continued, but Nathaniel had watched the staircase. Clara took a position near the side table by the hallway door, close enough to the room to fulfill whatever small duties might be required of her, far enough from the center not to draw attention. She kept her posture straight. She kept her expression neutral. She made herself useful in the way she had learned to make herself useful, quietly, efficiently, without asking for acknowledgement. Within the first hour, she had refilled the water pitcher on the side table, twice directed a confused housemaid toward the kitchen with a question about the dessert timing, and noticed that the ledger book left open on the study desk through the hallway door contained a significant accounting error in the third column of the July entries. She did not say anything about the ledger. It was not her place. She watched her stepsisters perform. Rebecca was excellent at this. She had always been excellent at this. The laugh that was warm, but not too warm. The tilt of the head that suggested interest, the way she moved through a room as if the room had been waiting for her specifically. Dorothea was less skilled, but compensated with beauty, which was Clara had observed frequently accepted as a substitute. Several of the younger men were already watching Rebecca. Nathaniel Ashford was not. Clara noticed this the way she noticed most things, without intending to, without attaching any particular meaning to it, simply because her mind had always operated like a ledger, recording what was true and what was inconsistent. Nathaniel Ashford looked at Rebecca once briefly when she laughed at something near the fireplace. He looked away before she had finished laughing. He was not dismissive about it. He simply did not appear to find what he was looking for. He talked to several women over the course of the evening's first hour. He was courteous to all of them. He was engaged with none of them. Then the stable boy happened. The boy, 12 years old, freckled with the sun-damaged look of someone who spent his days entirely outdoors, had been sent in from the stables with a message for the head housekeeper. He had come through the back garden, misjudged a doorway in his hurry, and caught his hand on the iron latch of the garden door, hard enough to open a cut across his palm. Not serious, not dangerous, but bleeding, and the boy was clearly frightened of the blood more than the pain standing just inside the garden door, with his hand pressed against his shirt, and his face gone white. Every woman near that end of the room saw him. 2 of them stepped back. 1 turned away and resumed her conversation. A 4th looked toward the nearest manservant, as if the question of who would handle this was clearly someone else's concern. Clara was across the room before she had made a conscious decision to move. She pulled a clean linen handkerchief from her sleeve, she always carried one, and knelt beside the boy, without ceremony, took his hand gently, and pressed the cloth against the cut, with steady, even pressure. She spoke to him quietly, asking his name, asking if anything else hurt, keeping her voice at the particular pitch that was useful for frightened children and spooked horses, calm, low, and completely certain that everything would be fine. "Thomas," she said. "Your name is Thomas, isn't it? I saw you yesterday near the far paddock." The boy nodded, some of the white leaving his face. "This is going to sting for a moment, and then it won't," Clara said. "Hold still for me. Good. What was the message for Mrs. Crane? I can take it to her for you." She was not aware that anyone was watching her. She was doing what needed to be done the way she had always done what needed to be done. Not because anyone was watching. Not because it would be noted, simply because a child was frightened, and a cut needed pressure, and she was the nearest person willing to act. She did not see Nathaniel Ashford step away from the window. She did not see him stop 4 feet behind her and watch for the better part of 2 minutes, not the cut, not the boy, but her. The way her hands moved, the way she spoke, the absolute absence of performance in anything she did. She did not see Elias Warren appear quietly at Nathaniel's shoulder and murmur something near his ear. She did not see Nathaniel's expression change. Warren had done his work quickly. He had a gift for it, the quiet accumulation of accurate information, the assembly of small facts into clear pictures. By the time Clara had seen the stable boy settled with Mrs. Crane and returned to her position near the side table, Warren had already confirmed 3 things. First, Clara Whitmore had not been invited to the Ashford gathering as a guest. Her name appeared nowhere on the family's list. Second, she had arrived in the service capacity assigned to her by her stepsisters, responsible for trunks, gowns, and incidental domestic needs during the visit. Third, she was the biological daughter of Edmund Whitmore and her late mother, Margaret Harlow. Whitmore had been the original owner of a significant parcel of land in the eastern county that had, in the years following Margaret's death, quietly transferred into Edmund Whitmore's sole name, despite the existence of a will that Clara had never been shown. Warren delivered this to Nathaniel in 3 sentences, standing close enough that no one overheard. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Add her name to the list, he said. Warren did not look surprised. And if Mr. Whitmore objects? He won't, Nathaniel said. He won't object to anything I do tonight. Psalm. Clara did not know her name had been added to the selection list. She found out when Nathaniel Ashford crossed the room and stopped in front of her. She had been straightening the linen on the side table, unnecessarily, if she was being honest with herself. But her hands required occupation when her mind was running too fast. She looked up and found him closer than expected, and for a moment her expression did exactly what it always did. When she was startled, went completely still. All the careful, neutral composure replaced for just a second by something unguarded. He noticed that too. She could see that he noticed. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was level. Not warm exactly, but not distant either, the voice of a man who was accustomed to choosing his words before he used them. "Mr. Ashford." She straightened fully, her hands folding in front of her. "I apologize if I was in the way. I was only—" "You weren't in the way." He paused. "I'd like to know how the boy is." Clara blinked. "Thomas? He's fine. The cut wasn't deep. Mrs. Crane is looking after him." "Good." Another pause. "How did you know his name?" "I saw him working near the paddock yesterday when we arrived. I made a point of learning the names of the people who work a property. It seemed practical." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, the suggestion of one somewhere behind the eyes. "Practical," he repeated. "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, Clara became acutely aware of the room around them, the way several nearby conversations had softened, the way one or two heads had turned. She became aware of Rebecca across the room, whose attention had sharpened like a hawk spotting movement in the grass. "Miss Whitmore," Nathaniel said, "I'd like you to walk with me in the garden, if you're willing." Clara looked at him steadily. "I wasn't invited to this gathering as a guest, Mr. Ashford. I think there may be some confusion about—" "There's no confusion," he said quietly. "Your name is on the list." She stared at him. "As of 20 minutes ago," he added, and the suggestion of that almost smile was slightly more visible now. "Mr. Warren saw to it." Clara said nothing for a moment. She was doing what she always did when something unexpected happened, running it through the internal ledger, checking it against what she knew to be true, looking for the error. But there was no error. He was looking at her with the direct, unhurried patience of a man who was waiting for an answer, and was entirely comfortable with the waiting. "All right," she said. They walked out through the garden door together. Behind them, Rebecca Whitmore set down her glass on the nearest surface, and her expression did not change at all, which was the most frightening version of her face. The garden was not much cooler than the house, but it was quieter. The candles in the parlor threw long yellow squares across the brick path, and the overgrown rose bushes that nobody had quite gotten to this season. The moon was 3/4, and the sky was clear enough that the stars had weight. Nathaniel walked at a measured pace and did not speak immediately, which Clara found she did not mind. She was not accustomed to men, to anyone really, who were comfortable with silence. "You manage accounts," he said after they had gone perhaps 30 feet along the garden path. It was not a question. Clara answered it anyway. "Since I was 14. "Your father's accounts?" "Yes." "And before that?" "Before that, I watched my mother do it." She paused. She was organized. She believed that a woman who understood money understood something fundamental about the world. "She taught me before she passed." Nathaniel slowed slightly. "How old were you?" 16. She kept her voice even. "My father remarried within the year." He did not offer condolence. She appreciated that. The condolences of people who had never met her mother had always felt like decorations on a wound. "The tenant leases," he said. "You noticed something today when you walked through the east property." Clara glanced at him. "You saw that?" "Warren saw it. He told me." She hesitated. She was not accustomed to being asked for her observations. She was accustomed to offering them quietly and watching them be ignored. "The eastern records are off by about 300 acres, she said. "The lease rate applied to the third parcel doesn't account for the drainage work done 2 seasons ago. The tenants are likely paying above the adjusted rate. It's either a recording error or—" She stopped. "Or someone benefited from the discrepancy," Nathaniel said. "I didn't say that?" "No," he said. "But you thought it, and you were right to think it." She said nothing. "Miss Whitmore." He stopped on the path and turned toward her, and she stopped too, and the square of candlelight from the parlor window was just far enough away that his face was half in shadow. "Who taught you to stay quiet when you know the answer?" The question arrived like a hand pressing on a bruise she had forgotten was there. She felt the impact of it before she had time to decide how to respond. "Experience," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That is the most honest answer I've received all evening," he said. "And the saddest." Clara looked away toward the dark line of the garden wall. The cicadas were still going. They were always going. "Mr. Ashford," she said carefully, "I don't know what you expect to find in me. I'm not—" She stopped, rearranged the sentence. "The women inside are accomplished in ways that matter to this kind of gathering. They know how to—" "I know what they know how to do," he said. He was not unkind about it. He was simply direct in the way of a man who had watched performances for long enough to stop finding them interesting. "I've been watching this kind of gathering since I was 19 years old. I know exactly what I'm looking at when I see it." "Then what are you looking for?" He considered that. "Someone who helps a frightened child," he said, "when no one powerful is watching." They returned to the house 20 minutes later. Clara moved back toward the side table. Nathaniel moved toward Warren and Holt, and the three of them spoke quietly near the far corner of the room. She watched her stepsisters watch her. Dorothea looked confused. Rebecca looked like a woman calculating distances and angles, running numbers in her head, arriving at a sum she did not like. Clara straightened the linen on the side table one more time and kept her expression still. She did not know what the night would bring. She did not know what Warren had told him, or how much, or what use Nathaniel Ashford intended to make of any of it. She did not know whether the kindness he had shown her in the garden was genuine or strategic, or simply the curiosity of a powerful man who had found something unexpectedly interesting in an unremarkable corner of the room. What she knew was this. Her shoulder still burned where the oil had soaked through. Her mother's gown was upstairs in a cedar box, ruined. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, a man who mattered in Virginia had looked at her, not at her stepsisters, not at the performance, not at the carefully constructed presentation of eligible womanhood that the room was thick with, but at her, at the plain blue dress and the steady hands and the honest answer, and had not looked away. She did not know what to do with that. She kept her hands folded in front of her, kept her face neutral, and waited to find out. Clara did not sleep that night. She lay on the narrow guest cot in the small room off the laundry hall, the room that had been assigned to her, not to her stepsisters, who had been given proper guest chambers with windows that faced the garden, and she stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around her. The gathering had ended past 10 o'clock. Carriages had rolled away down the creek road one by one. The candles had been put out. The voices had faded. She lay still and went through the evening the way she went through ledger columns methodically, without sentiment, checking each entry against what she knew to be true. Nathaniel Ashford had added her name to the list. He had walked with her in the garden. He had asked her questions that no one had asked her in years, not about her appearance, not about her accomplishments at the pianoforte, not about her family's social connections, but about tenant leases and drainage records, and why she had learned to stay quiet when she knew the answer. She pressed the heel of her hand against the burn on her shoulder and told herself firmly and clearly not to build anything out of one conversation on a garden path. She had seen what happened to women who built too much out of too little. She had watched her mother do it once, trusting the wrong man with the wrong documents, and the cost of that trust had followed Clara for 6 years now, in the form of a will that had never been read aloud, and a parcel of land she had no legal way to reach. She told herself, be careful. Be practical. Be the woman who notices the ledger error and says nothing until the right moment. She told herself all of that. And then she thought about the way he had said someone who helps a frightened child when no one powerful is watching, and she did not sleep for a long time. Morning came loud and early in a house full of guests. Clara was dressed and downstairs before most of the household staff had finished laying the breakfast table. She had learned this habit young. Arrive first, occupy the useful positions, make yourself necessary before anyone has the chance to declare you unnecessary. She refilled the water pitchers on the sideboard, helped a young housemaid locate the missing sugar bowl, and was quietly reviewing the morning's account entries in the small study off the hallway. The door had been left open, the ledger sitting plainly in view, when Elias Warren found her. He was a compact man in his 50s with the kind of face that gave nothing away as a professional matter, and everything away if you knew what you were looking for. Clara had decided within 20 minutes of meeting him the previous evening that he was both very intelligent and very loyal, which was a combination that made him either an invaluable ally or a significant obstacle, depending entirely on which direction his loyalty was pointed. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the open ledger, then at her. "You found the third column," he said. "Last night. It wasn't difficult to find." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't. I've been looking at it for 3 weeks." He came into the room and stood across the desk from her. "How did you arrive at 300 acres? The drainage survey from 1814 is filed in the back of the second volume. Someone cross-referenced it incorrectly or deliberately didn't cross-reference it at all when the new lease rates were set. If you apply the corrected acreage to the current rate structure, the tenants on the third parcel have been overpaying by roughly 11% for 2 seasons. Warren was quiet for a moment. "That is exactly the figure I arrived at." "Then you already know who signed the revised lease document." Another pause. "I do." "And Mr. Ashford? He knows what I know." Warren studied her with the careful attention of a man who was reassessing something. "Miss Whitmore, how long have you been doing work of this kind?" "Since I was 14, she said. For the second time in 12 hours, she said those words to someone in this house. They landed differently this time, not as an answer to a question about her past, but as a credential. Warren nodded slowly. "Mr. Ashford would like to speak with you this morning if you're willing, after breakfast. He asks that you bring nothing, no documents, no preparation. He wants a conversation, not a presentation." Clara set down the pen she had been holding. "And my stepsisters are breakfasting in the main dining room," Warren said, "and are unaware of this conversation." She looked at the open ledger for a moment. Then she closed it, carefully smoothed the front of her blue dress, and stood. "Tell him I'll be there," she said. The meeting room Nathaniel used for estate business was nothing like the polished formality of the parlor. It smelled of ink and old paper and the particular dry warmth of a room where serious work had been done for a long time. Maps were pinned to one wall. A land survey diagram occupied most of the desk surface. 2 wooden chairs sat across from each other without a table between them, which Clara noticed immediately and filed away. He wanted the conversation to be direct, not buffered. He was already seated when she arrived. He stood when she entered, which she had not expected, and the small automatic courtesy of it did something unexpected to the careful composure she had assembled on the walk down the hallway. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "thank you for coming. Mr. Ashford?" She sat in the opposite chair and folded her hands in her lap and looked at him directly. She had decided sometime between 3 in the morning and dawn that if he was going to see her at all, she was going to let him see her clearly. No performance. No angled presentation. If this was going to go wrong, it was going to go wrong honestly. "Warren tells me you found the discrepancy in under 5 minutes, he said. "The cross-reference error wasn't hidden very carefully." "No," he said, "because the person who created it assumed no one with the knowledge to find it would be looking." He paused. "That is a reasonable assumption in most circumstances. It was not a reasonable assumption last night." Clara said nothing. "I want to ask you something," Nathaniel said, and his voice shifted slightly, not softer exactly, but more direct. the way a man's voice shifts when he stops talking around something and starts talking at it. And I want you to answer me honestly, even if the honest answer is uncomfortable. All right. Your mother's land, the eastern parcel. Do you know what happened to it? The silence that followed was the kind that had physical weight. Clara had not expected him to say that. She had not expected anyone in this house, anyone anywhere, if she was being precise to say that. The question had lived inside her for 6 years. Like a locked room, she walked past every day, and the door had just opened without warning, and for a moment, her entire carefully constructed composure stood very still. I know what I believe happened to it, she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. I don't have the documents to prove it. What do you believe? I believe my father redirected the title after my mother died before the will could be properly executed. I believe there are people who know this. I believe no one has said anything because my father is not a powerful man, but he is a connected one, and the people who would have to speak are people who preferred not to involve themselves. Nathaniel was quiet. I believe, Clara added, that I have been aware of this for 4 years and have had no legal mechanism to address it, and no advocate willing to stand behind me while I tried. Another silence. That changes today, Nathaniel said. She looked at him. Callum Holt reviewed the county land records last night, he said. He found the original will filing. Your mother's signature is on it. Your name is in it. The title transfer your father executed 8 months after her death has irregularities. Significant ones. Clara's hands had tightened in her lap without her meaning them to. She loosened them deliberately. What kind of irregularities? The kind, he said carefully, that a judge would want to look at. She did not have time to fully absorb what he had told her because breakfast ended and the day's program began, and the gathering reasserted itself over everything. The second day of the Ashford selection had been organized by Nathaniel's mother, a gracious woman named Helen Ashford, who had the social precision of a general and the manner of someone's favorite aunt around a series of household and property tours. The women would walk the gardens, visit the tenant farms on the near-property tour, the house's domestic quarters. The idea, thinly veiled, was to see how each candidate conducted herself in a working household environment, not just in a parlor. Clara was not officially part of the program. She knew this. She had been added to the list by Nathaniel without ceremony or announcement. And while Warren apparently knew, and Holt apparently knew the rest of the household, and all of the guests were operating under the assumption that Clara Whitmore was a supplementary domestic presence, not a candidate, she had decided to let that assumption stand for now. It was more comfortable to be unseen. And being unseen, she had learned, was frequently more informative than being noticed. She walked behind the main group as the tour began, close enough to follow, far enough to avoid drawing attention. She listened to the conversations around her with the particular quality of attention she had developed over years of being present in rooms where people had forgotten she existed. It was during the tenant farm visit that the first real fracture appeared. The Ashford home farm ran about 400 acres on the near property, and the head tenant was a man named George Leland, 50s, sun-weathered with the look of someone who had worked hard for a long time and was still working. He met the group at the fence line with his hat in his hands and answered Helen Ashford's questions with the careful courtesy of a man who respected the family and trusted the process. Rebecca had positioned herself near Nathaniel for the walk, which she had been maneuvering toward all morning, with the graceful persistence of water finding a downhill path. She was asking him questions about the property, in a voice calibrated to sound both interested and decorative, impressed, but not ignorant, curious, but not demanding. Nathaniel answered her questions. He was polite. He was not engaged. Clara, standing 6 feet back near the fence post, noticed George Leland glancing toward her twice in the space of 3 minutes. The second time she caught his eye. He looked away quickly, then looked back. There was something in his face, not recognition exactly, more like the particular expression of a man who wants to say something and is calculating whether he is permitted to say it. She moved a few steps closer to him, while the group's attention was on Rebecca's next question. "Mr. Leland," she said quietly. He turned toward her. Up close, the calculation in his face was more visible. "Ma'am," he said, You're one of the Whitmore girls, ain't you?" "I am." He turned his hat in his hands. "Your daddy Edmund Whitmore?" "Yes." Something tightened in his jaw. "I knew your mother, ma'am. Not well, but I knew her. She was a fair woman. Real fair." A pause. "I knew her land, too. The eastern parcel. I leased 6 acres of it back when she was managing the accounts herself." He stopped. "Before she passed." Clara kept her voice very steady. "And after she passed," George Leland looked at his hat. "The new rate came in the year after. Different name on the lease document. I didn't ask about it. I had 3 children and a bad winter coming, and a man in my position don't ask about documents when the asking might cost him his lease." "I understand," Clara said. "I thought about it, though," he said quietly. "Over the years, I thought about it." He looked at her with the direct, uncomfortable honesty of a man who has been carrying something and is not entirely sure he wants to put it down. "If anyone was to ask me about it," he said, "formally and proper, I would tell what I know. I want you to know that, ma'am. I would tell it." Clara held his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Leland." She stepped back before anyone in the main group could notice the exchange. Her heart was doing something she did not entirely want it to do, a complicated shaking thing that was not quite hope and not quite grief, and was something she had spent considerable effort not feeling, because feeling it required believing that the locked room might actually open. She looked at the back of Nathaniel Ashford's head as the group moved forward along the fence line, and she thought he found the land records last night. He had Holt review them. He asked Warren to find me before breakfast. He did all of that before he had spoken more than 20 minutes with me total. She did not know what to do with that either. She filed it in the ledger and kept walking. By midday, the cracks in Rebecca's composure were beginning to show faint hairline fractures, visible only if you knew where to look, but Clara had been looking at Rebecca for years and knew every fault line in that particular structure. It was the garden walk that broke it open. Nathaniel had separated from the main group briefly to speak with Warren near the east garden wall. A 10-minute conversation, clearly substantive, the kind where both men stood close and kept their voices down. During those 10 minutes, Rebecca had been left in the company of 3 other women, and Dorothea, and the absence of her primary target had apparently made the social performance difficult to sustain. By the time Nathaniel returned, Rebecca had redirected her attention to Clara. It happened in front of everyone. "Clara," Rebecca said pleasantly in the voice she used when she wanted an audience. "I think Mrs. Crane was asking for help in the kitchen. You might want to see to that." Several women looked up. Clara was standing near the garden bench halfway through a quiet conversation with a younger woman named Miss Ann Pelham, who had been asking about household account management, with the genuine curiosity of someone who had recently realized she understood nothing about it. "I'll check with Mrs. Crane shortly," Clara said. "I think it was fairly urgent," Rebecca said, and the pleasantness in her voice thinned slightly at the edges. "She mentioned the preserve jars." "Then she'll find me when she needs me," Clara said. "I'll be along." The small silence that followed had edges. Ann Pelham looked between them with the wide-eyed attentiveness of someone who had grown up watching this exact kind of exchange and understood exactly what it meant, even if she couldn't have named the specific mechanism. Rebecca's smile stayed in place. It was one of her best skills, that smile, the ability to keep it exactly where it was, regardless of what was happening underneath. "Of course," she said. "I only meant to be helpful." "Of course you did," Clara said. She turned back to Ann Pelham and continued the conversation about account management. Across the garden, she did not look at Nathaniel. She heard him, though the slight shift in his stance, the pause in whatever he had been saying to Warren. She felt the weight of his attention without needing to see his face to confirm it. Miss Pelham, to her credit, also continued the conversation without skipping a beat. She was sharper than she appeared. The second twist came in the late afternoon, and Clara did not see it coming. She had been in the small study off the hallway again. The ledger had been left out again, and she could not help herself. The corrected figure was sitting right there demanding to be verified against the secondary volume when she heard voices in the hallway outside. Not the social voices of the gathering, not the domestic voices of the household staff. Something lower and faster, with an undercurrent she recognized immediately. Anger being carefully managed. She went still. Not appropriate, Elias. That was her father's voice. Edmund Whitmore, who had arrived mid-morning with a small traveling case and the expression of a man who had been told something he hadn't expected. Mr. Whitmore. Warren's voice level and deliberate. Mr. Ashford has simply extended the courtesy of including Miss Whitmore in the gathering's activities. I don't see. Clara was not brought here as a guest, her father said. She was brought here in a supporting capacity. Her stepsisters are the candidates. Clara is not. He stopped. She could hear him searching for the word that would do the work he needed it to do, without saying the thing he actually meant. Clara is not what, sir? Warren asked. The pause was long enough to have a shape. She is not prepared for this kind of attention, her father said finally. She will embarrass herself. I am thinking of her well-being. Clara stood in the study with her hand flat on the closed ledger and breathed very carefully through her nose. She had heard this construction before. I am thinking of your well-being. It was the sentence her father used when he meant, I am thinking of my own interests, and your visibility is inconvenient to them. She had learned to translate it years ago. She had thought she was past the point where hearing it could still land like a weight dropping on her sternum. She had been wrong about that. I will convey your concern to Mr. Ashford, Warren said in a tone that communicated clearly that he would convey no such thing. I'm sure he'll take it under advisement. A door opened and closed. Footsteps receded down the hall. Clara waited 30 seconds. Then she straightened, smoothed her dress, and walked out of the study. Warren was still in the hallway. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. How much of that did you hear? He asked. Enough, she said. He nodded slowly. Miss Whitmore, there is something you should know. He paused, choosing the words with the precision of a man who understood their weight. When Mr. Holt reviewed the land records last night, he did not do so casually. Mr. Ashford asked him to do it because he had reason to believe, based on information he obtained before this gathering, that your situation warranted examination. Clara stared at him. Before this gathering? Yes. He knew about my mother's land before I arrived. He had reason to look, Warren said carefully. He had not verified anything. He verified it last night. The room rearranged itself slightly in Clara's perception. Not in a way that changed the facts. The facts were what they were, but in the way a map shifts when a new landmark appears on it, requiring the rerouting of everything that had previously been plotted around a different center. Why? She said. Warren looked at her with the expression of a man who is telling the truth, but selecting carefully which part of it to tell. Because, he said, Mr. Ashford is not only choosing a wife, Miss Whitmore, he is choosing a partner. And when a man of his position and responsibilities makes that choice, he makes it with as much information as he can gather. A pause. He gathered information about all the families involved in this gathering. What he found regarding yours was not what anyone expected. Clara was quiet for a long moment. He was investigating, she said. He was being thorough, Warren said. There is a difference. She thought about that. Is there? She said. Monsieur. The evening meal reassembled everyone in the main dining room, and Clara sat at the far end of the long table, in the seat that had been quietly, deliberately placed there for her by a housemaid, who had clearly received specific instructions. Not the servant's end, not the shadows. A proper place at the table, with a proper setting with her name on a small folded card in someone's handwriting that she suspected was Warren's. Her father sat 4 seats away and did not look at her. Rebecca sat near the middle of the table, 2 seats from Nathaniel, and her composure for the evening was flawless. The laugh exactly right. The conversation pitched at exactly the correct frequency. The performance of the gathered young woman of good family running at its most polished. She was very good, Clara had always known that. Rebecca was exceptional at this, at the construction and maintenance of a social presentation so seamlessly executed that the labor of it was invisible. It was her genuine talent, and Clara had never underestimated it. What she had recently begun to suspect was that Nathaniel Ashford was not the kind of man who found that talent interesting. He was polite across the dinner. He was gracious. He participated in the conversation around him with the ease of a man who had hosted a great many dinners and found people genuinely engaging in moderate doses. He spoke to Rebecca twice at length and was attentive both times. He also at one point glanced down the length of the table directly at Clara. Not as a performance, not as a social gesture, but with the unguarded directness of a man who is checking on something that matters to him, and held her gaze for 2 full seconds before turning back to the conversation beside him. 2 seconds was not a long time. It was long enough. Anne Pelham, seated 2 places to Clara's right, had noticed. She looked at Clara with an expression of barely contained interest. "He does that," Anne said quietly, under cover of a louder conversation across the table. "He's been doing it all day." "I don't know what you mean," Clara said. "Yes, you do," Anne said without hostility. "And for what it's worth, I think you're the only person in this room who doesn't know that you should." After dinner, the gathering moved to the parlor again, and music was played, and the social machinery resumed its careful, practiced rotation. Clara was standing near the window when Dorothea appeared at her elbow. This was different from Rebecca's appearances. Rebecca came with a script, with a plan, with the specific cold architecture of a woman who had prepared her attack. Dorothea came with impulse, which was in some ways more dangerous. "You think this is going somewhere?" Dorothea said, not loudly, under the music, under the hum of conversation, just to Clara. Clara did not answer. "It isn't," Dorothea said. "Whatever you think is happening, whatever he said to you, whatever Warren told you, it doesn't change what you are. You're our father's leftover daughter. You don't have land, you don't have money, you don't have a proper invitation to this house. You have a blue day dress and a dead woman's account books." Clara looked at the window. "Dorothea," she said quietly. "What? You should know something." She kept her voice level and her face still, and spoke in the particular measured cadence of someone who has arrived finally and without drama at the point where the truth is going to come out regardless of what anyone does to stop it. "Everything you just listed, the land, the money, the documents, those aren't things I don't have. They're things that were taken from me. There is a difference." A pause. "And the difference is now a legal matter." Dorothea stared at her. "Mr. Holt reviewed the county records last night," Clara said. "I thought you should know that." She turned back to the room. Across the parlor, Rebecca was watching them both. The smile was still in place, but her eyes had gone very flat and very still, and Clara recognized that look. It was the look of a woman recalculating, reassessing, reaching for a new plan before the current one had fully failed. Clara looked at her steadily. Rebecca looked back. The music continued, and somewhere behind her she heard Nathaniel Ashford begin to cross the room. He reached her before she had taken 3 steps away from Dorothea. Not hurried, not theatrical. Just the quiet, deliberate movement of a man who had decided something and was acting on it without announcing the decision first. He stopped beside her near the window, close enough to speak without being overheard, and for a moment he said nothing at all. Just stood there and let the room see him standing there, which Clara understood was itself a statement. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes." "That's not what your face says." She looked at him. "My face is fine." "Your face," he said carefully, "looks like a woman who just said something true out loud for the first time in a long while and is not entirely sure what to do with the aftermath." Clara was quiet for a moment. Across the room, Dorothea had retreated to Rebecca's side. The two of them were speaking in the low, rapid exchange of people revising a plan under time pressure. Clara watched them and kept her expression still. "I told Dorothea that Mr. Holt had reviewed the county records," she said. "I know. Warren told me you'd spoken with him this afternoon." I thought she should know before—" She stopped. "Before Rebecca finds out and moves first," Nathaniel said. She looked at him again. "That is what you were thinking," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him considering something, turning it over with the deliberateness of a man who thought carefully before he moved. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "Rebecca already knows." The music shifted to something slower. Two couples moved toward the center of the room. "How long?" Clara said. "I believe she's known since this morning when your father arrived and Warren intercepted him in the hall. Your father is not a man who keeps things to himself under pressure. He would have gone to Rebecca first." A pause. "She has been performing flawlessly all evening. That performance is the plan." Clara absorbed this. "Then the letters are already written." Nathaniel turned to look at her directly. "What letters?" "Rebecca doesn't lose quietly," Clara said. "She never has. When she knows she's losing ground, she doesn't retreat. She attacks, and she attacks in writing, because written things feel official, and official things frighten people." She kept her voice very level. "She has done this before. When I was 17, she wrote a letter to the pastor's wife claiming I had been dishonest with the household funds. It took me 4 months to correct it, and by the time I did, half the people who'd heard the accusation had forgotten there was ever a correction." The music continued. The two couples danced. The room moved around them in its careful social orbit. Nathaniel was looking at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the particular focus of a man who was listening not just to the words, but to everything underneath them. "She's going to use the final ball," Clara said. "It's tomorrow night. That's the last public moment. That's when she'll move." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "That is what I believe too. Then you're already prepared." "I am." He paused. "The question is whether you are." She looked at him. "What's coming tomorrow night," he said quietly, "is going to be public, and it is going to be designed to humiliate you in front of everyone in this house. Rebecca is very good at this. You know that better than I do." He held her gaze. "I need to know that when it happens, you can stay standing." Clara thought about the burn on her shoulder. She thought about the cedar box upstairs and the ruined ivory gown, and the 4 minutes she had sat on the edge of the narrow cot before she made herself stand up. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "I have been staying standing for 6 years." Something shifted in his face. Small, significant. "Then tomorrow," he said, "I need you to trust me." She did not sleep any better that night than she had the one before. The difference was that this time she was not lying awake sorting through uncertainty. She was lying awake sorting through certainty, which was in some ways harder, because certainty required a different kind of preparation, because you could not protect yourself from a thing you had decided to walk toward. She had told Nathaniel she would trust him. She had meant it when she said it. In the quiet dark of the laundry hall room, she examined that decision from every angle, and found that she still meant it, which was both reassuring and alarming, because she had not trusted anyone in this particular way for a very long time, and she was not entirely confident she still knew how. Her mother had trusted people. Her mother had left a will, had filed it properly, had believed the document would do its work, because documents were supposed to do their work. And then she had died, and the document had done nothing, and Clara had spent 6 years learning that trust extended without verification was simply another word for exposure. But Nathaniel Ashford had verified. He had gathered information before she arrived. He had added her name to the list before she had done anything to warrant it. He had sat across from her in a room with no table between them and asked her questions that no one asked women in 1816 Virginia unless they genuinely wanted to know the answers. She thought about what Warren had said. He is not only choosing a wife, he is choosing a partner. She lay still and breathed through the burn on her shoulder and told herself tomorrow. Handle tomorrow. The morning of the final day arrived with a particular quality of tension that everyone in the house felt, but no one named. It moved through the breakfast table, in the two careful conversations. in the way women watched each other from under lowered lashes, in the way the household staff moved a fraction faster, and with a fraction less conversation than they had the 2 days prior. Clara ate breakfast at the table in her proper place, in her proper seat with the folded card, and said very little. Her father did not look at her. Rebecca talked the entire meal, drawing the table's attention like a lit lamp draws moths warmly, effortlessly, with the specific skill of a woman who understood that the last night before a decision was the most important performance of all. She was brilliant. Clara watched her and felt something that was not quite admiration, but was the complicated near neighbor of it, the acknowledgement of talent operating in service of a goal you knew was wrong. Dorothea was quieter than usual. She kept glancing at Clara with the look of a woman who had heard a locked room mentioned and was now listening for sounds behind the door. After breakfast, Clara found Anne Pelham in the upstairs sitting room working at a piece of embroidery with the focused inattention of someone who was thinking hard about something other than thread. "May I sit?" Clara said. Anne looked up immediately. "Please." Clara sat in the chair across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. "You told Dorothea about the land records," Anne said. "Yes." "And now Rebecca knows." "Yes." Anne set the embroidery down. "What's she going to do?" "She's going to stand up tonight in front of everyone and accuse me of something. She will have letters. She is very organized." Clara kept her hands still in her lap. "The letters will say something about theft, probably. Or dishonesty. Or manipulation. Something that has enough surface plausibility that people will hesitate before dismissing it, and that hesitation is all she needs. Even if the accusation is corrected later, the social damage is done in the moment of hesitation." Anne looked at her steadily. "And Mr. Ashford is prepared. He told me so last night." "Do you believe him?" Clara considered that honestly. "Yes." Anne picked the embroidery back up, looked at it, set it down again. "Clara, I have been watching this gathering for 3 days, and I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it without arguing with me." "All right." "Oh, he has not looked at anyone else the way he looks at you. Not once. Not for 30 seconds. She said it plainly, without sentiment or elaboration, in the direct tone of a woman who was simply reporting what she had seen. "I don't say that to flatter you. I say it because I think you have spent so long being invisible that you don't entirely know what it looks like when someone is looking at you." Clara was quiet. "Tonight is going to be very hard," Anne said. "But it is going to end a particular way, and I think some part of you already knows that." The final ball began at 7. The house had been rearranged for it, furniture, moved rugs, rolled back, every candle in the house deployed, until the whole first floor glowed warm and unsteady. Music arrived with 3 men from Charlottesville who set up in the far corner of the main room. Women who had taken 3 days to warm to each other now stood in easy conversation, loosened slightly by the knowledge that the evening was the culmination, that after tonight, the careful social machinery would ease its pressure and the world would return to its ordinary size. Clara wore the blue dress. She had pressed it carefully that afternoon, taken the small remaining wrinkle from the sleeve with a warm flat iron borrowed from the laundry, and she wore it without apology. It was what she had. It was clean and honest, and it was hers. Nathaniel was standing near the fireplace when she came in speaking with Holt, and he saw her the moment she entered the room. He did not cross to her. He simply looked and nodded the small, deliberate acknowledgement of a man who was telling her, "I see you. Stay steady." She stayed steady. The first hour passed in the ordinary choreography of a final gathering night. Music, dancing, conversation that had the slightly elevated quality of people who understood the stakes. Rebecca moved through the room with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had timed something precisely and was not yet at the moment to deploy it. Clara danced with 2 men who asked her a young merchant's son who was pleasant and nervous, and an older widower named Mr. Cassidy, who turned out to have an excellent sense of humor and a very high opinion of her conversation about lease reform. She discovered having something resembling a good time, which surprised her, and she filed that surprise carefully in the ledger. At 9:15, Nathaniel crossed the room and asked her to dance. It was not a quiet request. He said it in the ordinary social tone of a man asking a woman to dance at a ball, clearly, without lowering his voice, and the room heard it. She felt the room hear it in the slight adjustment of conversations nearby, the small shift in attention. "I'd be glad to," she said. They danced a country reel, which was not a dance for quiet conversation. It was fast and patterned and required too much attention to footwork for anything to be said privately. But it was a public thing, and it was very visible, and when it ended he offered her his arm to walk from the floor, and she took it, and they stood together near the garden window and talked about crop rotation for 4 minutes, in the perfectly natural manner of two people who found each other genuinely interesting. Rebecca watched all of it. She had stopped performing ease about 40 minutes ago. Clara could see it, the way the performance had tightened, gone slightly rigid at the edges, the way Dorothea kept appearing at Rebecca's elbow and being dispatched away again with a small, sharp gesture. At 9:30, Rebecca moved. She did not begin with drama. That was the craft of it. The thing Clara had warned Nathaniel about, and had not been entirely believed even by herself when she said it, Rebecca had taste enough to begin quietly. She simply stepped into the center of the room during a pause in the music, and she said in a carrying voice that was calibrated to reach every corner without sounding raised, "I apologize for interrupting, but I believe there is something the company should be made aware of before the evening concludes." The room turned toward her. Music did not stop immediately. It faded the way music fades when the musicians notice that the room has changed, a few notes trailing off like they weren't sure they should. Then it was quiet. Clara stood near the window. She felt the room's attention rotate away from the dance floor and toward Rebecca, and knew with the absolute certainty of a woman who had been studying this opponent for years that the next 60 seconds were the most important of the entire gathering. She did not move. She did not change her expression. She stood where she was and breathed. "I have here," Rebecca said, producing 2 folded papers from the small bag at her wrist. "Letters that I believe speak to the character of a woman who has been unexpectedly introduced into this gathering under circumstances that I can only describe as irregular." A murmur ran through the room. Clara heard it. She kept her face still. "These letters," Rebecca continued, "concern Miss Clara Whitmore, who has been present in this house under the representation of—" "Miss Whitmore," said Elias Warren. He said it from across the room clearly in the level professional voice of a man making a precise statement. Rebecca stopped. Everyone looked at Warren. He was standing near the study doorway, which Clara had not noticed was open, and beside him stood Mr. Callum Holt. And beside Holt stood a man Clara did not immediately recognize, 50s weathered, holding his hat in both hands. George Leland. "Miss Whitmore," Warren said again, "was added to this gathering's list at Mr. Ashford's request, with full authorization. There is nothing irregular about her presence here." He paused. "As for those letters, Mr. Holt, if you would." Holt stepped forward and produced his own document, not folded, not from a small wrist bag, but a full unfolded page, the kind that carries a legal authority recognizable from across a room. "I would like to note for the company," Holt said, in the dry, precise voice of a man who lived in legal documents, "that I have reviewed copies of the letters Miss Rebecca Whitmore intends to present, having obtained them from a source who will presently identify themselves, and I can confirm that the handwriting on those letters does not belong to Miss Clara Whitmore." The murmur in the room went sharper. Rebecca's face did not change. The smile held. The performance held. But something behind her eyes had gone very still. "Furthermore," Holt continued, "I can confirm that they were written within the past 48 hours, as the ink on the originals is consistent with fresh composition, not correspondence of standing age." "That's a lie," Rebecca said, pleasantly, evenly. "Those letters are— I wrote them." The voice was Dorothea's. Every head in the room turned. Dorothea was standing near the hallway door, and she had the look of a woman who had made a decision very recently and was not yet sure if it was the right one, but had passed the point of being able to unmake it. Her face was white. Her hands were at her sides. "I wrote them," she said again. Her voice was not steady. It was close to steady, but not quite. "Rebecca told me what to say. She said that if I wrote it, if the handwriting wasn't hers, then if it was ever questioned." She stopped. "I wrote what she told me to write. Clara didn't steal anything. Clara hasn't done anything." The room was completely silent. Rebecca turned to look at her sister with an expression that was not anger and not shock. It was the flat, bottomless look of a woman who had built something very carefully and was watching it fall and had not yet decided whether to try to catch it. "Dorothea," Rebecca said. "No," Dorothea said. "No, I'm done with it." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she kept her chin up. "She's our sister. She's been our sister for 6 years and we've—" She stopped again, pressed her lips together, started over. "I'm done." The silence in the room had the quality of something that had been holding its breath and was deciding whether to exhale. Clara had not moved. She was still at the window. The burn on her shoulder was a dull, steady ache. The cedar box was upstairs in the laundry hall room, and the ruined ivory gown was inside it, and none of that had changed. But something else had. She became aware of movement beside her. She had not heard him cross the room. He moved the way he stood, with the particular quietness of a man who had stopped needing to announce himself. He was simply there, and then he was removing his dark formal coat, and then the weight of it settled around her shoulders, and she felt the warmth of it, and the weight of it, and the absolute, unmistakable publicness of it. The room saw. The room was going to talk about it for years. She understood that already. Nathaniel stepped around to face her, and he looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the garden path, directly, without performance, without the careful social angling that everyone else in the room was engaged in. And he said in a voice that was not loud, but that carried in the way that quiet certainty always carries in a room full of listening people. "Character is not declared in a ballroom. It is proven when no one powerful is watching." He paused. "And if this room wishes to know the finest woman here," he said, "look at the woman wearing my coat." Clara held his gaze. She thought, "I am not going to cry in front of these people." She did not cry. She stood in the dark coat that was warm from his body and looked at Nathaniel Ashford and felt something unlock in her chest that she had not realized she had been holding closed, like a window latched for so long. The frame had begun to warp around it. "You planned all of that," she said quietly, "just for him." "Warren planned most of it," he said. "Holt executed it. Leland agreed to come when asked." A pause. "I only made sure they were all in the room." "And Dorothea?" He looked at her steadily. "I didn't plan Dorothea." She absorbed that. "Neither did I," she said. Across the room, Edmund Whitmore was on his feet. His face had the particular mottled color of a man who has been sitting quietly in the company of a deception for years and has just watched it dismantle itself in public, in front of every person he respected in the county. He looked at Clara. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at the coat around his daughter's shoulders and the room full of witnesses, and whatever he had been about to say, he did not say it. He sat back down. Rebecca was still standing in the center of the room, holding the 2 folded letters that no longer served any purpose. She held them for a moment more, as if letting go of them was the last acknowledgement she was willing to make, and then she set them on the nearest surface, pressed her hands flat against her skirt, and walked toward the hallway door with her chin up, and her face composed, and her smile entirely finally gone. The music, after a moment, started again. Holt folded his legal document back into his jacket. Warren exchanged a small, quiet look with Clara from across the room. George Leland turned his hat in his hands, nodded to her once, and allowed a housemaid to guide him toward the kitchen for something to eat. Anne Pelham appeared at Clara's left side, and when Clara glanced at her, Anne was looking at the coat around her shoulders with an expression of calm, satisfied vindication, the face of a woman who had said it is going to end a particular way and had been exactly right. "I told you," Anne said simply. "You did," Clara said. Nathaniel was still standing in front of her. He had not moved away. He was waiting. Clara understood with the same deliberate patience he had shown on the garden path 2 nights ago in the meeting room the morning after at the dinner table, when he had held her gaze for 2 seconds and then looked away. He was waiting for her. Not for a performance. Not for the answer a woman was supposed to give in a room full of witnesses at the conclusion of a social gathering. Just for her, for whatever she actually wanted to say, in whatever time she actually needed to say it. She stood in the weight of his coat and looked at him, and thought about her mother's handwriting in a cedar box. For the day you are finally seen. She thought about 6 years. She thought about the burn on her shoulder that still hadn't stopped aching. "Mr. Ashford," she said. "Yes." "Thank you," she said, "for the coat, and for the rest of it." He looked at her for a moment. "You did every difficult thing yourself," he said quietly. "I only made sure they could not look away." She held that. She looked at the room around her, the same people, the same summer heat pressing through the garden window, and she was different inside it than she had been 3 days ago. Not because anything about the room had changed, but because the particular kind of invisibility she had worn for 6 years had just in front of 40 witnesses and one man's dark formal coat been permanently revoked. She was 30 seconds from crying and had no intention of doing it. "I believe," she said, keeping her voice very even, "that there are still 2 dances left in the evening." Nathaniel extended his hand. "There are," he said. She took it. The last 2 dances ended near 11 o'clock, and by midnight, Ashford House had gone quiet in the particular way of a house that has witnessed something significant and is still absorbing it. The guests had departed in stages, some with the brisk efficiency of people who needed to process what they'd seen before they could speak about it, some with the lingering reluctance of people who understood they had just watched something they would be describing for years, and were not yet ready to stop being inside it. Anne Pelham had embraced Clara briefly at the door, said nothing, and then said everything with the pressure of her hands on Clara's arms before she stepped into her family's carriage. George Leland had eaten a full meal in the kitchen and been driven home by one of Ashford's stablemen. Edmund Whitmore had left without speaking to Clara. She had watched his carriage go from the upper hallway window and had felt not relief, not satisfaction, not the particular shape of grief she had expected. Something quieter. Something that felt like the moment after a very long storm when the air goes still, and you stand in it and think. So that is what silence feels like. Rebecca and Dorothea had taken a room at the inn in town, rather than remain under the Ashford roof overnight. Clara had not seen either of them go. She had only known they were gone by the absence, the specific weighted absence of people whose presence had shaped every room she'd walked into for 6 years. She sat on the edge of the narrow cot in the laundry hall room and held Nathaniel's coat in her lap for a long time before she folded it carefully over the chair. Tomorrow, she told herself. Everything real begins tomorrow. It began at 8 in the morning. Callum Holt arrived in the small study before breakfast had fully concluded, carrying a leather document case and the expression of a man who had slept 4 hours and considered it sufficient. He set the case on the desk, opened it, and laid out 3 documents side by side with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood that the clarity of physical arrangement was itself a form of argument. Clara sat across from him. Nathaniel sat beside her. Not across from her, beside her, which she noticed and which Holt appeared to notice and which nobody commented on. "The original will," Holt said, tapping the first document filed with the county clerk in March of 1810, 4 months before your mother passed. Her signature, 2 witnesses properly executed. It names you Clara Margaret Whitmore as sole heir to the eastern parcel, approximately 260 acres in the Albemarle boundary, and to a sum held in deposit at the Richmond Merchant Bank under your mother's family name. Clara looked at the document. She had known it existed. She had never seen it. Her mother's handwriting was at the bottom of the page, the same handwriting she knew from the note in the cedar box. For the day you are finally seen. The letters were the same shape. The pen pressure was the same. Her mother had been alive and sitting at a desk when she signed that document, and she had known Clara understood this suddenly and completely. She had known that the document might need to be found someday. That was why she had filed it with the clerk. That was why she had left the note in the cedar box. She had known. Clara pressed her lips together and looked at the second document. The title transfer, Holt said. Executed 8 months after your mother's death. Signed by your father, witnessed by a man named Aldous Crane, no relation to the Ashford housekeeper who was at that time employed by a land management firm that your father had a financial relationship with. He paused. The witness's signature on this document appears on no other county record. I have reason to believe the witness was not present for the execution. A forged witness, Nathaniel said. It has all the characteristics of one, Holt said, which is not the same as proven, but it is sufficient to require a judge's examination. And the third document, Clara said. The bank deposit, Holt said. Your mother's family account. Opened in 1803, maintained until her death, transferred to your father's management as part of his administration of her estate, which he was legally permitted to do as the surviving spouse, provisionally pending proper execution of the will. He looked at her. The will was not properly executed. The funds were absorbed into your father's accounts within 18 months of her death. Clara was quiet. How much? She said. Holt told her. She had not known the amount. She had known money existed. She had not known the specific weight of it, the number of years it represented, the specific shape of what had been taken. She sat with that number for a moment and let it be real. What happens now? She said. Now. Holt said, I file a petition with the county court requesting review of the title transfer and examination of the estate administration. Your father will be notified. He will have the opportunity to respond. He paused. Given what transpired last night, and given the witness question, I expect his response to be limited. He'll fold, Nathaniel said. Not with satisfaction, simply as an accurate assessment. He will attempt to negotiate, Holt said, which is a form of folding. Clara looked at the documents. 3 pieces of paper, 2,600 acres and a bank deposit, and 6 years of silence. He could have simply told me, she said. She said it without anger, just the plain flat observation of someone naming a thing that was true. Any time in 6 years, he could have simply told me. Neither man spoke. He was ashamed, she said, or afraid, or both. She looked at Nathaniel. Does it matter which? For the legal proceeding, no, he said. For you. He paused. That's yours to decide. Edmund Whitmore arrived at Ashford House at 10 o'clock that morning unannounced. Warren intercepted him at the door, not unkindly, but firmly, with the particular professional immovability of a man who had been told that interceptions might be necessary and had prepared accordingly. He showed Edmund Whitmore into the front sitting room and sent word to Holt, who sent word to Nathaniel, who sent word to Clara. She had been in the garden with Anne Pelham, who had returned that morning under the transparent pretext of having left a glove behind, which Clara suspected was not true and did not mention. She left Anne on the garden bench and went inside. She had not spoken to her father since before the gathering began. She had not, if she was being precise, had a genuine conversation with him in 2 years, the kind where both people were saying what they actually meant and listening to what the other person actually said. What they'd had instead was a series of managed exchanges, polite surfaces over silences that had grown so thick they'd become structural. She walked into the sitting room and closed the door and looked at him. Edmund Whitmore was 61 years old and looked at this morning in a way he did not always. He was sitting in the chair by the window with his hat on his knee and his hands around the hat brim, turning it slowly the way people turn things when their hands need occupation and their minds are not certain where to begin. Clara, he said. Papa, she said. She sat across from him. He looked at the hat brim. I heard Holt filed this morning. He did. You didn't give me the opportunity to... He stopped, started over. I would have liked to speak with you before it became a legal matter. Clara looked at him. You had 6 years, Papa? His hands went still. You had 6 years, she said again. Not with cruelty, she was not trying to wound him. She was trying to be accurate, and sometimes accuracy landed like a wound, whether you intended it to or not. You knew what the will said. You were there when she filed it. You knew what you did with the title and with the bank account, And you knew every day for 6 years that I was in your house, managing your accounts and your household, and raising your stepdaughter's social prospects, and you never once." She stopped. She was not going to cry in front of him. She had not cried in front of him since the week her mother died, and she was not going to start now. "You were ashamed," she said. "I think, or you told yourself it wasn't the right time, or that I was too young, or that you'd address it eventually. I don't know which, but I know that none of those reasons were ever about me." Edmund looked at her. His face was doing something complicated, the particular internal labor of a man confronting a truth he has been walking around for long enough that confronting it feels physical, like moving furniture that has been in the same place for years. "Your mother," he said finally. His voice had the rough quality of a word being pulled up from somewhere deep. "Your mother was... She was better than me, at most things. At the accounts, at the property decisions, at reading people clearly. She was better than me, and I knew it, and I..." He stopped. "After she passed, I told myself I was protecting the estate. That the transfer was that it was practical. That you were 16 and couldn't manage. I was managing your accounts at 14, Clara said. I know that now." "You knew it then." He didn't answer. "I need you to understand something," Clara said. She kept her voice level. She had been saying difficult true things out loud for 3 days now, and she was getting, if not comfortable with it, at least practiced. "I am not asking for an apology. An apology doesn't restore 260 acres or 6 years. What I am asking for, what Holt will be asking for through the court, is the thing itself. The land. The account. What she left me." Edmund nodded. It was a very small nod, but it was an honest one. The nod of a man who has stopped calculating and has arrived finally at the undecorated truth of a situation. "I won't contest it," he said. Clara held his gaze. "I won't contest it," he said again. "Tell Holt. Tell him there's no contest. The land is yours. The account, I'll need to discuss the figures with him. There have been expenses against it over the years, but I will not contest the principle." Clara was quiet for a moment. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for it. The absence of it arrived like a step where you'd expected a stare, and she had to catch herself. "Thank you," she said. She said it plainly, without warmth and without coldness, because that was the accurate tone for it. He looked at her. "Clara, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't..." "No," she said gently. "It doesn't, but I heard it." She stood. "I'll tell Holt." She walked to the door. She had her hand on the handle when he spoke again. "He's a good man," Edmund said. "Ashford, he's..." A pause. "Your mother would have liked him." Clara stilled for just a moment. "Yes," she said. "I think she would have." She went out into the hallway and closed the door behind her and stood very still for 10 seconds and did not cry. Then she went to find Holt. The news moved through the county faster than she would have expected and with more force. By afternoon, 3 neighboring families who had attended the gathering had called on Ashford House ostensibly to pay their respects after the evening, actually to take the measure of what had changed and recalibrate their social positioning accordingly. This was how Virginia County society operated, not with the dramatic reversals of ballroom moments, but with the quiet, steady reorientation of people deciding which direction was now uphill. Clara sat in the parlor for the first 2 calls at Nathaniel's request, not as his hostess, not as a social performance, but simply present, introduced correctly, observed. She watched people recalibrate in real time and found it more interesting than she'd expected. It was a kind of accounting, she thought. A ledger adjustment. People rewrote their entries when the facts changed, and the facts had changed. The 3rd call was from Judge Harmon Ellie, who was 70, had known Nathaniel's father, and arrived with the specific directness of a man who did not have time for social performance and had stopped pretending otherwise approximately 40 years ago. He sat across from Clara in the parlor, looked at her for 30 seconds and said, "You're Margaret Harlow's girl." "Yes, sir," Clara said. "I knew your mother. She was a sensible woman, better with numbers than any man I ever hired." He paused. I signed her will as second witness back in 1810. The air in the room shifted. Clara looked at him. I was not approached about it, he said, because the people who might have approached me knew I would be difficult to manage. He said it with the complete absence of self-congratulation. It was simply true, and he was stating it. I have been aware for some time that the proper execution of Margaret's estate was incomplete. I did not have sufficient standing to act on it independently. I was waiting for someone to provide the mechanism. Mr. Holt filed this morning, Clara said. I know. I will be available to testify as to the will's original execution. He stood, which apparently meant the call was over because he was a man who decided the length of his own visits. Your mother filed that document because she was afraid something might go wrong. She was right to be afraid. He looked at Clara directly. She would be very pleased with how this has gone. He picked up his hat, nodded to Nathaniel, nodded to Clara, and left. The room was quiet for a moment. He's been waiting 6 years to say that? Nathaniel said. I know, Clara said. She pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed and did not look at Nathaniel for a moment because her eyes were doing something she had not given them permission to do, and she needed 30 seconds. She took 30 seconds. Then she looked at him. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. Last night, the coat. She held his gaze. Was that, did you plan that specifically, or was it? Yes, he said. Yes, it was planned, or yes, it was. Yes, I had thought about it, he said. Yes, I intended to do it at the right moment. And yes. He paused, and something in his face shifted in the way she had learned to watch for the small internal rearrangement of a man who was deciding to say the exact true thing instead of the easier approximate thing. Yes, it was also not planned. Because when I saw you standing there with the letters in her hand, and the room watching you, and your face, not afraid, just... He stopped. Determined, Clara said quietly. Determined, he agreed. It stopped being a plan. It became necessary, the way something is necessary. He looked at her steadily. The way some things simply are. Clara held that. That is the most honest thing you've said to me, she said. I've been working up to it, he said. She almost smiled. It was a near thing, close enough that she saw him see it. Mr. Ashford, she said. Nathaniel, he said. I think at this point Nathaniel is appropriate. Nathaniel. She tried the word. It fit differently than the formal address, more personal, more weight to it. What happens now with all of this? The land, the case, the gathering that has technically concluded. He looked at her with the particular steadiness of a man who has already decided his answer and is simply choosing the right words for it. The gathering concluded last night, he said. That part is done. A pause. What I am asking, is whether you would permit me to court you, formally, with the full knowledge of what that means in terms of time and intention, and where I hope it leads. He paused once more. I am not rushing you. I am not assuming. I am asking clearly and directly whether you are willing. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the ledger, the one she kept in her head, the one that had been running continuous entries for 22 years. On one side, everything that had been taken. The land, the account, the years, the safety, the visibility, the small daily dignity of being seen in a room you lived in. On the other side, she placed this moment. This man who had added her name to a list before she'd done anything to warrant it, who had sat across from her without a table between them and asked her why she'd learned to stay quiet, who had stood in a room full of witnesses and said, "Look at the woman wearing my coat," and meant every word of it. She placed it on the other side. The ledger balanced differently than it had this morning. "I'm willing," she said. He let out a breath. Just a small one. The breath of a man who had been steadier than he needed to be for 3 days and was allowing himself in this one small measure to stop. "Good," he said. "Then tomorrow I'd like to take you to see the eastern parcel, your land. I think you should walk it." She had not expected that. She had expected flowers or formal letters or the careful social rituals of courtship as she had always understood it to be conducted. Not this. "You want to take me to see the land first?" she said. "It's yours," he said simply. "You should know what you have." Son. The first visit to the eastern parcel happened on a Tuesday 3 days after the gathering ended. Clara stood on the boundary line of 260 acres that had belonged to her mother, and would now, pending Holt's legal proceedings, belong to her. And she felt the Virginia summer press down on her shoulders like something she was finally allowed to hold. Nathaniel stood beside her and said nothing for a full minute, which she appreciated. "The drainage work is visible from here," she said eventually. "The second field, yes. Leland told me they finished it 2 summers ago. The lease rate should reflect that." She looked out over the near field. "If you adjust for the drainage improvement and the soil yield difference since 1814, the current tenants are still paying above the accurate rate." "I know," he said. "That's been my intention to adjust it. I've been waiting for the land to be under proper ownership before changing the terms." She looked at him. "I've been managing this parcel informally since Holt first brought it to my attention," he said, "keeping the accounts separately, applying the over-collection to a held sum. When the transfer is complete, there will be 2 seasons of corrected balance waiting." Clara stared at him. "You've been holding the overpayment," she said. "For me?" "For the proper owner of the land," he said, "who I believed would eventually be you." She was quiet for a long moment. "Nathaniel," she said, that is an extraordinary thing to have done." "It was the accurate thing," he said. "The tenants paid the wrong rate. The wrong rate is correctable. The correction belongs to the land's owner." He looked at her with the even simplicity of a man for whom this required no explanation. There was never any question about where it belonged. She turned back to the field. She was 30 seconds from crying again, and was once again refusing to do it, but the reasons were different now than they had been at any point in the past 3 days. This was not the grief of 6 years of loss. This was something else, the specific, unfamiliar weight of being considered, of having someone think ahead on her behalf, not out of pity or strategy, but simply because they had decided she mattered and acted accordingly. She had not known what that felt like. She was learning. "George Leland's lease renewal is in October," she said, because her voice needed occupation. "I'd like to review the terms myself before it's signed." "Of course," Nathaniel said. "And the third field, the drainage issue in the southwest corner, isn't just a recording problem. The actual channel needs extending by about 40 feet, or the yield will continue to underperform. I'll have the survey done this week." "I'd like to review that too, Clara." His voice was warm. She had not heard quite that warmth in it before, a particular ease, the warmth of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. "You can review everything. That is rather the point." She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the expression she had been cataloging since the garden path, the one that was not performance, not strategy, not the careful social presentation of a man managing his public image. Just him. Direct and warm, and entirely sure of what he was looking at. "I'm going to be very involved in the management of this property," she said. "I'm counting on it," he said. "And the Ashford accounts. I noticed 3 entries in the July ledger that warrant examination." "I know. Warren noticed them too. He's been waiting for someone he trusts to look at them." "You trust my judgment with your accounts." "I trust your judgment," he said simply, "with everything that matters." The cicadas were going. They were always going in a Virginia summer. The field stretched out ahead of them, 260 acres of her mother's land. And the sun was hot, and the air was thick, and Clara Whitmore was standing on ground that was hers beside a man who had looked at her in a room full of people performing, and had wanted only her, and she thought Mama. "I think I found what you meant." She did not say it aloud, but she thought her mother would have heard it anyway. "All right," she said. She squared her shoulders. "Show me the rest of it." And Nathaniel Ashford smiled fully genuinely the first time she had seen the complete version of it, and said, "Yes, ma'am." And they walked on together through the long Virginia summer into everything that came next. The legal transfer took 11 weeks. 11 weeks of Holt filing and appearing and corresponding and filing again. 11 weeks of county court notices, and her father's lawyer, a nervous man from Richmond who clearly wished he were handling a different case, submitting carefully worded responses that amounted each time to incremental retreat. Judge Harmon Ellie appeared twice in the proceedings, both times to confirm the facts of the original will's execution, with the blunt, undeniable authority of a man who had been waiting years to say what he knew. Edmund Whitmore did not contest it. He had said he wouldn't, and he didn't, which Clara noted in the internal ledger without ceremony and without revision. He had done the right thing finally, and she recorded it as what it was, not more, not less. The morning Holt placed the completed transfer document in her hands. She sat at the desk in the Ashford study. She had been using it for 6 weeks by then, with a regularity that had become unremarkable, reviewing accounts and lease records and the ongoing survey corrections for the eastern parcel's southwest drainage, and she held the paper and read her own name on it 3 times. Clara Margaret Whitmore, sole owner. 260 acres Albemarle Boundary, Commonwealth of Virginia. Nathaniel was in the doorway. He had not come fully into the room, giving her the space of the moment. She looked up at him. "It's done," she said. "Yes," he said. She set the document carefully on the desk. She aligned it with the corner straightened. It pressed her palm flat against the surface of it for just a moment, the way you press your hand against something real to confirm it hasn't changed. "My mother filed that will in March of 1810, she said. "She died in July. She had 4 months between the filing and her death, and she spent part of them writing a note and putting it in a cedar box." She looked at the document. "She knew I'd need it someday. She prepared for it even when she was—" She stopped. She was always thinking ahead of where she was. Nathaniel came into the room then. He sat in the chair across from her. No desk between them, same as the first morning, same as it had always been between them, and he looked at her with the steady attention she had come to know as the most reliable thing in her current life. "Tell me about her," he said. Clara looked at him. In 11 weeks of courtship, through property surveys and account reviews and long evening conversations on the Ashford back porch that lasted until the fireflies gave out, she had talked about many things. She had not talked about her mother. Not fully. Not the way this moment seemed to require. She talked about her mother. She talked for 40 minutes, and Nathaniel listened to every word of it. The wedding was in October, 6 weeks after the transfer completed. Small by the standards of what a wedding between Nathaniel Ashford and anyone might have been expected to be. The Ashford parlor. 30 guests, Judge Ellie officiating because he had asked to, and because Clara had said yes before Nathaniel had finished relaying the request. Ann Pelham as witness. Warren in the back of the room with the expression of a man who had seen this coming and was deeply satisfied to have been right. Clara wore ivory. She had taken the gown from the cedar box the week before and spent 3 evenings repairing it herself, not to erase what had been done to it, but to work with it. Stitching over the stained shoulder with a length of cream ribbon from the local dry goods store that her mother had actually purchased years ago and never used. The ribbon was slightly different from the original fabric. You could see the repair if you looked. Clara had decided she did not mind that you could see it. Anne had cried when she saw the dress. Clara had handed her a handkerchief and told her to collect herself, and Anne had laughed through the tears, which was the correct response. During the ceremony, when Judge Ellie asked Clara if she took this man, she said yes, with the same directness she brought to ledger entries and lease reviews, plainly, without decoration, meaning exactly what she said. Nathaniel looked at her when she said it, the way he had looked at her every day since the garden path, directly without performance, like a man who had found what he was looking for and was not confused about it. After, when the guests had eaten and the evening had warmed and the first stars were showing through the parlor window, he took her hand in his and held it without saying anything, and she let him, which for Clara Whitmore was its own kind of declaration. She moved into Ashford House with a cedar box, a leather account book she had been keeping since she was 14, and a set of opinions about the southwest drainage situation that she had not yet finished expressing. The first week she reorganized the household accounts into a 3-column system That Warren admitted with visible reluctance and then visible relief was significantly clearer than the previous method. The second week, she rode out to the eastern parcel with George Leland and walked the full boundary line herself, taking notes in the leather book, asking questions that Leland answered with the growing ease of a man who had worked land long enough to recognize when the person asking knew something real about it. "Your mother used to walk the boundary herself," Leland said on the third day of the survey. "I know," Clara said. "She told me. She'd be pleased with the drainage correction." He paused. "She'd be pleased with all of it, I reckon." Clara wrote something in the leather book that had nothing to do with drainage measurements and everything to do with the way certain true things arrive at exactly the moment you need them. The third week she found the second accounting discrepancy. It was in the Ashford estate records in the Northern Property Ledger, a quarterly fee paid to a management firm that had upon examination not performed any verifiable management services in the preceding 2 years. The amount was not enormous. The pattern was: she sat at the study desk and worked backward through 5 years of entries and assembled what she found into a clear documented sequence, and then she took it to Nathaniel. He read through it. He was quiet for a moment. "This is Aldous Crane's firm," he said. "Yes," she said. "The same firm that witnessed my father's title transfer." He looked at her. "They've been doing this across at least 4 Albemarle County properties," she said. "I found the pattern in 2 of the other accounts when I cross-referenced. The fees are always the same amount, always the same quarterly schedule, always tied to a service description that is general enough to be unverifiable." She paused. "It is a very organized operation." Nathaniel set the documents on the desk. "How long did it take you to find this?" "3 days, she said. "I might have found it faster if I'd had access to the Northern Ledger from the beginning." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had learned was his version of something that would have been laughter in a man who expressed things less quietly. "You're going to find everything, aren't you?" he said. "Probably," she said. "Is that a problem?" "Clara," he said, and the warmth in his voice was the full version now, the way it had been since October, easy and unguarded. "It is the least of my problems, and the best thing that has happened to these accounts in 20 years. She sent the documented pattern to Holt the following morning. Holt forwarded it to the county court. 3 weeks later, Aldous Crane's firm was under formal examination. By spring, 2 other Albemarle families had recovered misdirected fees. By summer, the firm had dissolved. The first real test came in February. It came in the form of a social call, a formal one, the kind announced a day in advance, which in Virginia County society in 1817 was a signal of intent. The caller was Mrs. Patricia Dunmore, who was 63 years old, had been the county's most influential social arbiter for 20 years, and had a son who had been at the Ashford gathering in July, and had watched everything that happened in the ballroom, with the focused attention of a young man filing information for later use. Clara received her in the parlor. She had been warned by Anne and by Warren separately that Mrs. Dunmore was the kind of woman who decided the social temperature of every room she entered, and that the question of how she treated Clara Whitmore Ashford would determine how the rest of the county treated Clara Whitmore Ashford for the foreseeable future. Clara served tea, sat across from Mrs. Dunmore, and answered her questions with the honest directness she brought to everything. She did not perform. She did not angle. When Mrs. Dunmore asked about the Eastern Parcel's management, Clara told her exactly what she had done with it. When Mrs. Dunmore asked about the household account restructuring, Clara explained the 3-column system clearly and without apology. When Mrs. Dunmore asked with the calibrated delicacy of a woman who understood she was asking something pointed, how Clara found the adjustment to her new responsibilities, Clara said, "I find I am doing work I have always known how to do in a place where it is finally recognized as work." Mrs. Dunmore looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Your mother was Margaret Harlow." "Yes, ma'am." "She sat in that same chair approximately 15 years ago and told me she was managing her husband's property better than he was, and that she expected to continue doing so." A pause. "She was not wrong." Clara held very still. "I knew about the will," Mrs. Dunmore said. Her voice was even, but underneath it was something that had been sitting there for a long time. I knew what happened to it. I did not. She stopped. I did not intervene as I should have. I want you to know that I am aware of that. The fire in the parlor grate shifted. Clara heard it. I appreciate you saying so, Clara said. I am saying it because it is true, not because it is comfortable. Mrs. Dunmore set down her teacup with the decisive finality of a woman closing one chapter and opening the next. I am saying it because your mother deserved better, and so did you, and because the people in this county who whispered about the gathering in July should have the opportunity to observe firsthand exactly what kind of woman is now managing Ashford House. She picked up her teacup again. The drainage correction on the eastern parcel, she said. My son has a similar problem on the north field of our property. I wonder if you might be willing to share the survey methodology. Clara looked at her. I'd be glad to, she said. Oh, spring brought the first planting season under Clara's full management of the eastern parcel, and with it the particular satisfaction of watching a thing you planned become a thing that was real. The southwest drainage extension performed exactly as the survey had projected. The third field's yield improved by the margin she had calculated. George Leland rode up to the boundary line one morning in April with an expression of a man who had been correct about something and was very pleased about it. She said the yield would come back if the channel was extended. He told his wife that evening, apparently because his wife told someone, and that someone told someone. And by May there were 2 neighboring landowners who had asked to speak with Clara about their own drainage situations, which she handled from the Ashford study on Tuesday afternoons with the same methodical attention she gave everything. Nathaniel watched this with the steady, undeclared satisfaction of a man who had known what he was looking at from the beginning. You're becoming the person people come to, he said one evening after the second landowner's visit. I'm only answering questions, she said. You're answering them accurately and without making people feel foolish for not knowing, he said. That is rarer than you think. She looked at him across the desk. 6 months of marriage had not changed the quality of the way he looked at her. She had wondered in the weeks before the wedding whether the specific attention he paid her was a product of the gathering circumstances of the drama, and the coat, and the ballroom, and the particular concentrated pressure of 3 days that had changed everything. Whether it would ease once everything settled into the ordinary shape of daily life. It had not eased. It had deepened, which she had not anticipated, and which continued to arrive as a surprise each time she recognized it, like finding a door in a familiar room that you hadn't known was there. There's something I want to discuss with you, she said. All right. The women's situation. She kept her voice even and direct, the way she kept it when she was saying something she had thought through carefully and was certain about. The legal situation. In this county and in this state. Women who have no advocate when documents go wrong, when estates are mismanaged, when the people who are supposed to protect their interests do not. She paused. I have been thinking about what my mother's experience would have looked like if there had been someone she could go to. A resource. A formal mechanism. Nathaniel was listening with his full attention. She knew the difference now between his social attention and his full attention, and this was the latter. I want to establish something, she said. Something formal. In my mother's name. A fund or an office, something that provides women in this county with access to legal review of estate and property documents. That gives them what my mother didn't have. What I didn't have until you put Holt in a room with the county records. She waited. How much do you need to establish it? He said. She had prepared for resistance. She had prepared arguments, precedents, the specific financial case for why this was viable. She had been ready to make the case from 6 angles if necessary. She looked at him. You're not going to argue about it, she said. No, he said. I'm going to ask how much you need and then I'm going to help you build it. She held that. Nathaniel, she said. This is going to be, it will not be quiet. It will make some people uncomfortable. The same people who redirected my mother's land are not singular. This kind of thing is not rare. When I start pulling at it, it will unravel further than anyone expects. I know, he said, and you're not, Clara. His voice was patient and warm and entirely certain. "I sat in a room with the county land records and found your mother's stolen inheritance, and I added your name to a list, and I put my coat around your shoulders in front of 40 witnesses. Do you genuinely believe at this point that I am going to be troubled by uncomfortable—" She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "I don't." "Good," he said. "Then tell me the plan." The Margaret Harlow Fund was established in the spring of 1818. Holt administered it. Judge Ellie endorsed it publicly and attached his name to the founding documents with the vigor of a man who had been waiting for this particular mechanism to exist. Mrs. Dunmore hosted the announcement gathering, which was the social equivalent of a formal blessing, and the room was full. Clara stood in the Dunmore parlor and explained the fund's purpose to 40 people who ranged from fully persuaded to deeply uncertain, and she did it in the same plain direct voice she used for lease reviews and drainage surveys. Not performing, not angling, simply telling the truth about what the problem was and what she intended to do about it. Afterward, a woman named Sarah Greer, who was 28 and had the eyes of someone who had been frightened for a long time, waited until almost everyone had gone and then approached Clara near the window. "My husband's estate," Sarah said. Her voice was low. "He passed last spring. The documents—" She stopped. "I don't understand them. And the men who are supposed to help me, I don't know if they are helping me." Clara looked at her directly. "Come to Ashford House on Tuesday," she said. "Bring everything you have. We'll look at it together." Sarah's breath released in the specific way of a person who has been holding it for longer than they knew. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Clara said gently. "Let's see what the documents say." But she already knew what she would find, because she had found it before in different papers, with different names and the same essential pattern. The pattern of a woman whose knowledge had been dismissed, and whose rights had been redirected, and who had learned to stay quiet because staying quiet felt like the only form of safety available. She knew that pattern from the inside. She knew exactly where to look. The charity gathering that fall was held at Ashford House because by then, Ashford House was where things were held, not because of the property size, though that helped, but because of the specific quality of the woman who ran it, which everyone in the county had, by increments arrived at recognizing. Clara stood near the garden window during the midpoint of the evening watching the room. Sarah Greer was there, settled and steady in a way she had not been 6 months ago, her estate documents reviewed and corrected, and her inheritance restored. 3 other women from the Tuesday sessions were there. Mrs. Dunmore was there, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation with Judge Ellie about expanding the fund's scope to the neighboring county. Warren was there in the back of the room with the expression he wore when things were going approximately as well as he had planned. Anne Pelham appeared at Clara's elbow with 2 glasses of water and the particular warmth of someone who had been present for all of it and intended to remain so. 40 people, Anne said. Last year there were 30 at the Ashford gathering, and half of them were watching your stepsisters perform. I remember, Clara said. Now they're watching you. They're watching the room, Clara said. That's different. Is it? Anne looked at her sideways. Clara looked at the room. At Sarah Greer's settled face. At the 3 Tuesday women in easy conversation. At Judge Ellie's engaged attention and Mrs. Dunmore's capable hands and Warren's satisfied expression, and the whole warm, purposeful movement of 40 people gathered around something that mattered. She felt something against her hand. Nathaniel had crossed the room quietly the way he always moved, and he was standing beside her now, and he had taken her hand in his without announcement or performance, simply because they were in a room together, and that was where his hand was. She looked at him. He was looking at the room too, at the same room she was looking at, the thing they had built together, the thing that had started with a woman on a floor, and a ruined dress, and a man who heard a scream from upstairs, and decided to find out who it belonged to. You should have the coat, he said. She looked at him. The one from the ballroom, he said. I had Warren put it in the cedar box. It's yours. She was quiet for a moment. The cedar box that had held her mother's dress. The cedar box with the note in her mother's handwriting. That box now held this too. "You put it in my mother's box," she said. "It belongs with the rest of what's yours," he said simply. She held that. She thought about the girl who had sat on the edge of a narrow cot and counted 4 minutes before she made herself stand up. She thought about the ledger that had run in her head for 6 years, entry after entry on the loss side, the weight of it carried so long she had forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. She thought about her mother's handwriting. "For the day you are finally seen." She had walked into a house in the Virginia summer carrying everything she'd lost, and she had walked back out carrying everything she was, and the difference between those two things had turned out to be the distance between invisible and undeniable. Nathaniel's hand was warm in hers. The room moved around them with the particular warmth of people engaged in something real. Outside through the garden window, the Virginia evening was settling into that specific quality of late summer dusk that smelled like cut grass and cooling earth. "You did every difficult thing yourself," Nathaniel said quietly. "I only made sure they could not look away." She looked at him for a long, steady moment. "You did more than that," she said. "Perhaps a little more," he said. She turned back to the room. Her house, her land, beyond the window, her mother's name, on a fund that was changing the shape of things for women who had no one standing behind them. And she stood in all of it, with her shoulders straight, and her hand in his, and her name on every document that mattered. Clara Margaret Whitmore Ashford. No longer invisible. No longer silent. No longer owned by anyone's cruelty, or diminished by anyone's fear, or erased by anyone's careful, deliberate, ultimately futile attempt to make her disappear. She had walked through the fire of that ballroom and come out the other side holding everything that was hers. And she intended to keep it, and she intended to use it, and she intended to make sure that the next woman who stood on the floor of an upstairs room with a ruined dress and 4 minutes to decide whether to stand up would find when she finally came downstairs that someone had already put her name on the list. That was the legacy. That was what her mother had prepared for filing a will in March and leaving a note in a cedar box, and trusting that the truth, given enough time and the right witness, would eventually refuse to stay buried. It had not stayed buried, and Clara Whitmore Ashford, standing in the warm Virginia evening, with her hand in her husband's and her mother's name over the door of something that would outlast them both, was living proof that dignity cannot